The Black experience differentiates geographically. No one is denying that. But we all got off of the same boat, descended from the same ancestors, and united by the same struggle. Any claims that you're not is simply doing the oppressor's work for them. The CIA is winning, everyone. White supremacy and hierarchical structures proliferate when the oppressed are kept divided. If we, the oppressed, can accept the hierarchy so deeply that we turn against each other, we keep the boot on one another's necks. They can just sit back and watch, and it happens on both sides. It's Black Americans discriminating against Africans and Caribbeans and the rest of Black people worldwide, and Black people globally harboring white supremacist ideologies of how African Americans were weak and that's why they were enslaved. Who told you that you were different? Well, they hate us, so we hate them. Who told you that they hate you? Seriously, think who benefits the most from us choosing to hate each other when we all have bigger fish to fry and bigger enemies to confront? But we know this already. We know that we are told immigrants and poor people are stealing our jobs and trans people are indoctrinating our children when there exists a man who is a trillionaire, but the single mom cleaning toilets down the street and paying taxes but happens to be undocumented is the reason why your life isn't as good as it could be. We know that it's very intentional indoctrination that we are all being fed. And I don't blame anyone. I don't. Our minds have been co-opted, our education has been stolen, our history has been rewritten. But at some point, we must open our eyes. And not only are our struggles united, but every single form of oppression is embedded within white supremacy. It's all one and the same, essentially. You can't even really tell where one ends and the other begins. White men at the onset of chattel slavery shifted their ideologies of projected sinfulness from white women to instead the black woman in order to maintain caste separation, creating the notion of this pure white woman defined by the white man and forever beneath him. It was fundamentally altered by slavery. It existed before then, but it was something different after. Capitalism is what led to slavery. The deep desire to own the labor of another human being created an entire system of dehumanization in order to justify it. It is all interconnected and it is all deeply intentional. You have to understand one to understand the other. And Black Panther, I believe, is a movie that uniquely centers its struggle. Now, Black Panther is quite literally my favorite movie, and I've always focused on its depiction of the tension between the ideologies commonly attributed to Martin Luther King Jr., civil disobedience, and Malcolm X by any means necessary. Although by the time of both of these men's deaths, their philosophies had actually shifted much closer to what is attributed to the other, they are known throughout history for these things. But what Black Panther is also about is what happens when people, united by blood, yet separated by distance, choose to oppress each other. In Black Panther, T'Challa's father, T'Chaka, chooses to kill his own brother and abandon his nephew for the crime of wanting to arm the people suffering in diaspora. Wakanda deemed themselves above getting involved in the struggles of others. They weren't colonized, you see, so that ain't got nothing to do with them. This, I think, is a perfect depiction of the diaspora wars. And also, the soundtrack is fire. Everything about this movie is so black. It's beautiful. Black culture, black experience, Afrofuturism. It's so tea. Let's talk more about the nation of Wakanda. Wakanda is ruled by monarchy. The first Black Panther was simply the first person to find the heart-shaped herbs and transform himself into a superhuman. With this power, he was able to unite 5 tribes, with the exception of the Jabari tribe, who isolated themselves in the mountains. It is not lost on me that just like when colonizers happened to be the first, allegedly, to find a resource and exploit it for gain, the first Black Panther seemed to employ a similar principle. And so it's not too surprising that Wakanda has this ideology that a lot of what we call first world nations seem to have, which is that we shouldn't be tasked with helping other people. I mean, we're the chosen ones, we're the elites. Why should we bother? And so, with luck, resources, and proximity, Wakanda was able to become the strongest and most technologically advanced nation in the world. And what did they do with this power? Did they use it to improve the world around them? Except that with great power comes great responsibility, as Spider Man was taught. Or did they simply hoard it for themselves? This fundamental man made us versus them mentality not only underpins the themes of the film, but reflects what happens when out of a sense of fear and self-preservation, because that is what motivated these decisions made by Wakanda. Marginalized communities isolate themselves from one another. Wakanda did so to avoid being colonized like the rest of Africa and protect the vibranium, but protect it for who? And in the present age, at what cost? This is a central conflict at the heart of the Black Panther movie. What role does Wakanda have to play in the modern era? Do they continue their tradition for tradition's sake and to honor their elders and history that has been systematically stolen from oppressed people across generations? Or do they unite with the rest of the world and protect the people that are still their people? As Killmonger says in the film, life began right here on this continent. So ain't all people your people. So this all comes to a head with the characters of T'Challa, the new king and new Black Panther, and his newly resurfaced secret cousin known as Killmonger. There's a vast difference between the childhoods of Chadwick Boseman's T'Challa, may he rest in peace, and Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger. I remember watching this in the theater in, I think, 8th grade. Don't fact check me on that. And all the girls were geeking over Michael B. Jordan, literally screaming every time he came on the screen and cheering and clapping. But I just could not stop looking at Chadwick Boseman. T'Challa was raised as the crown prince in the protection of Wakanda, protected from the realities and sufferings of the rest of the world. It's easy to ignore when you're not directly confronted by it. And everyone in Wakanda is very comfortable. So him as royalty, imagine how much better his life is compared to Killmonger, who was born in California to the younger brother of King T'Challa, Prince Njobu, who was tragically killed by T'Chaka. Did Njobu betray Wakanda? Yes, he aided Claw in a terrorist attack, stealing vibranium from Wakanda and allowing an outsider to know the truth about the country. But one could argue he only betrayed them because Wakanda first betrayed the rest of the world by refusing to give aid, by refusing to help, by refusing to do anything. I mean, come on, guys. And being so committed to their founding philosophy and not allowing themselves to evolve from tradition to ways that might serve them and everyone else better, they created Killmonger. They abandoned him to hate and they sealed his fate. This is exemplified when both men go to the ancestral realm. T'Challa is in open air, but Killmonger is stuck in that room where he found his father dead. And his father even has his guard up with him. He almost snaps at him. That is the anger that comes from fear and an increased need of protection that Ta-Nehisi Coates argues in Between the World and Me is prevalent within the Black community. This is what eventually leads to generational trauma. And Killmonger, he's a boy when he sees his father's ancestral realm, and he initially retreats. He's afraid, but the anger also soon resurfaces, and he is so angry. It takes rage to kill as many people as he did, and he is justified in his anger. What happened to him was not right. But as an adult, he projects this anger onto T'Challa, calling him the son of a murderer. I killed my own brothers and sisters right here on this continent just so I could kill you. He views T'Challa for not who he is, but for what he represents. Luckily for him, T'Challa has a bit more empathy than that. T'Challa recognizes that fundamentally what Wakandans, what Killmonger and Nujobu are struggling with is this shared sense of fear and anger, and they're simply reacting based on that. T'Challa comes to learn that ultimately it does not matter who is to blame, really. We can all attribute our pain and flaws to circumstances we cannot control. Will we allow that harm to perpetuate? Is the question. T'Challa acknowledges eventually that Wakanda was wrong, but still he does not agree with Killmonger's by any means necessary mentality of arming black people worldwide with vibranium weapons to revolt. This is where we see that Malcolm X versus MLK Jr. divide. We can agree that revolution is necessary, but how do we achieve it? So after the death of T'Chaka in Captain American Civil War after an attack at the UN, which is a long story, different video, but it was essentially collateral damage so that a bitter man named Zemo could tear apart the Avengers in a very convoluted plan that somehow succeeded. After his father's death, T'Challa must stop and consider the type of king that he wants to be. There is no time to grieve. He has avenged his father by capturing Zemo. Now he must take the throne. So he goes and he retrieves his ex, Nakia, from her mission, played by the wonderful Lupita Nyong'o. She is a war dog, meaning she does engage in foreign aid missions on behalf of Wakanda. In fact, she was the one to first suggest to T'Challa that Wakanda expand its global outreach. When discussing this with Kabe, who is the head of the Water Tribe, River Tribe, one of the two, and who's married to Okoye, head of the Doramology, Wakabi remarks, "You let the refugees in, they bring their problems with them, and then Wakanda is just like everywhere else." Which, first of all, no, it would still be incredibly powerful and advanced, as you guys love to boast about. But also, secondly, why are Wakandans more entitled to a better life than anyone else? By virtue of where they were born. This is a common argument against immigration, actually, that certain Americans use white Americans in particular, our people we know are dedicated to maintaining a system of white supremacy in which they are the majority and can decide who else gets to be an American and who deserves humanity. But when black people say it, you do realize white people once said the same about us. Enslaved people were not Americans. Wakabi does say that he would support going out with his men to quote, clean up the rest of the world. Sharing what they have is beneath them. But war, we can do war. It's remarkable almost the the shared mentalities that Wakanda has with so-called first world countries. This innate sense of superiority that prevents them from ultimately, at the end of the day, doing the right thing. It's as if Wakanda, in order to protect themselves from the colonizers, adopted a lot of their same ideologies. Wakabi is also the one who encourages T'Challa to pursue Claw and lets Killmonger and accepts Killmonger, even though he must know that Killmonger was working with Claw as retaliation for his own parents' death because Claw killed his parents. So when Killmonger killed Claw, he was like, come on in, buddy. He completely switches sides. He too has unaddressed anger that has been allowed to fester and is now bursting at the seams, intensified by what he perceives to be T'Challa's betrayal for failing the mission and now bringing back Claw himself. It's also worth noting that because Wakanda has never really been attacked, they took this terrorist attack very, very personally. They all felt it was a deep communal wound. We meet Killmonger for the first time in the Museum of British History, which is famous for being a true representation of the British colonial spirit because it's filled with stolen artifacts. Killmonger is working with Claw, who, by the way, is racist. At one point, he says that he had to steal the vibranium because you savages didn't deserve it. Okay. Okay. Killmonger corrects the museum expert on one of the artifacts, informing her that it's from Wakanda and it's made of vibranium, and that her ancestors didn't pay a fair price. Can we get some snaps for reparations? Need some reparations for my people. As Beyonce said, the prevailing argument against reparations is that white people should not be punished for the sins of the past, and besides, racism is over. Never mind the fact that reparations doesn't punish white people and black people are actually the ones to this day being punished for the white sins of the past. The US gets them into Holocaust survivors. No one complains. And no, racism is not over. That is why we say nothing has really changed. We're called dramatic when we say that. We're told at least we are no longer slaves. No black person needs to be reminded of that. No black person needs to be reminded that 400 or 500 years ago we would have been slaves. But society needs to be reminded that the infrastructure of systemic racism is alive and well. That is why we say nothing has really changed. Because in 2009, schools were less integrated than they were at the time of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, and the racial wealth gap was the biggest ever in recorded history following the 2008-2009 economic recession. Because every step towards progress is matched by one towards injustice. Slavery ended, we got Jim Crow. That ends, we have this current era of police brutality and mass incarceration. We get the first black president. We get Donald Trump. Do not allow delusions of continuous racial progress trick you into ignoring the racial inequities of the present. It affects all of us. The modern American worker is manipulated using managerial tactics perfected during slavery. The government is still plagued by the political inaction it was designed to have by Southern slave owners who wanted to augment their power and to prevent the nation from ever being able to abolish slavery, politically speaking. We still have the House of Representatives and the Electoral College as a result of that. Meaning, democracy in the US really requires an overwhelming majority, which is unlikely in the age of polarizing bipartisanship. The ebbs and flows of the speculative stock market began with the cotton boom, where enslaved people were used as collateral in banks for loans. The police used to be slave patrols. Racism is not over, and it makes me angry how we are policed and how we choose to conceptualize our own oppression. And ultimately, that is what causes the diaspora wars. Anger. Black Americans are angry at people in other places of the world who mock them until they generalize, but those people are also angry and afraid. We have everything in common. Our struggle is united. That is why the civil rights movement inspired mass revolution in West Africa that led to the end of imperialism there. We are in this together. Now, the theme of tradition comes up very often in Black Panther when M'Baku of the Jabari tribe charges T'Challa for the throne. Again, a very antiquated way of determining where power belongs. He says that Shuri, T'Challa's prodigy younger sister who oversees the technological advancements of the nation, scoffs at tradition. In the ancestor realm, when T'Challa says he is scared to live without his father simply replies, "A father who has not prepared his children to live without him has failed. Have I ever failed you?" Which is a bit emotionally manipulative and does not address the issue. T'Challa has been taught to simply accept what he has been taught from his family and ancestors. That is tradition. Tradition is history and very, very important, something that they should be proud to have. Tradition and the deep desire to protect it is why they remain isolated and still fearful of outsiders, making enemies out of everyone, even their own people in diaspora. But why must honoring tradition come at the expense of progress? T'Challa says to Nakia that if the world knew the truth, they would lose their way of life. And she brings up this amazing point. But they are so powerful, so enriched, so worthy of protection. Why are they also somehow simultaneously not capable of protecting themselves? Make it make sense. T'Challa does go on his own journey from believing he is, quote, not king of all people, but king of Wakanda, and that it is not their way to be judged or an executioner to people who are not their own, too, after learning the truth about Killmonger and a near-death experience, acknowledging that his father and ancestors were wrong. All of you were wrong, he says when he returns to the ancestor realm, to turn your backs on the rest of the world. I also want to briefly touch on Killmonger's girlfriend in the film, who literally doesn't have a name, and who I believe serves as a representation of how expendable women can be to even self-described revolutionaries. He uses her, then kills her the second she becomes a problem to him. Within the fight for civil rights, Despite the support of Black women, we were often sidelined and disrespected, forced to fight for a seat at the table. Wakanda may have the Dora Milaje, but until T'Challa's untimely death, I don't believe they ever had a female Black Panther and sovereign ruler. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Don't kill me, but I don't think they have. It's also interesting to me how T'Challa supports the non-violence side of this conflict represented here. Yet he is a superhero who often employs violence. He's protected by the Dora Milaje, who use spears and highly advanced weaponry. That's not really typical of a nation in this day and age. So it does come down to who has the right to use these weapons, not if they should simply exist. When Claw makes weapons out of unranium, he has no right to do so, which deeply upsets him because he believes the Wakandans to be inferior to him. So how dare they? Wakandans hate outsiders. They do. They are afraid that those who do not understand them will exploit them, as they saw happen to every other African nation. But they also do have an innate sense of superiority. They do believe themselves to be above the other Black people worldwide, otherwise they would help them, right? Njobu knew Killmonger wouldn't be welcome because he was born in the US. Agent Ross is stunned to learn the truth about Wakanda, and it's a humorous plot point in the film when he's hilariously at times not really welcome where he is clearly might have been the first time a white person has ever made it to Wakanda. So they even only brought him back because he got shot saving Nakia, and T'Challa insists that if they have the means to save him, they cannot just let him die. It's another example of the contention between tradition and progress and self-preservation and aid. When it comes to Killmonger's Black Panther versus T'Challa's Black Panther, I've always liked the detail of how Killmonger opted for the necklace that T'Challa passed on because it was too ostentatious. When Killmonger initially defeats his color in battle, he's proud of himself. He has achieved the goal, delivered on his angle, reclaimed the violence, and used it to become king. Is this your king? I'm the king now. He feels vindicated and deserving because of how he has suffered. This, in his line, justifies his violent journey. It proves that violence can win. And in his brief reign, he rules by fear. He burns the rest of the heart-shaped herbs so that they can never be another. Fear, anger, violence is all he's been taught. It's how his own people were subjugated. But ultimately, he does lose. Killmonger is backed by Wakabi and friends who are united by rage, while T'Challa is supported by the Dora Milaje and the Jabari tribe, who go as far as to abandon their generations-long grievances with the rest of Wakanda to do what they believe is the right thing. He is supported by people who believe in him. T'Challa, the true Black Panther, is not worthy simply because of where he's been born. He's worthy because of his character, because of his heart. He actually offers nuance to the argument. He listens to what he hears, and he makes reasonable decisions. Like his father suggests at the start, surround yourself with people that you trust. And he uses what they have to say. He listens to what both Nakia and Killmonger say without helping others, without being complacent in their comfort. And at the end of the film, he opens Wakanda up to the rest of the world. He accepts that Killmonger was wrong, that his uncle may have betrayed them, but his father may have created something even worse. But also that he cannot be allowed to continue as he has been doing, waging war and destruction, nor does he even ultimately diagnose Killmonger as a lost cause. He kills him, essentially in self-defense. Unlike how his father killed his uncle. He didn't have to kill him, and he didn't have to leave that little boy there. The message, ultimately, is that both total abandonment and perpetuation of harm are both wrong. This is not how we achieve equality. Imperial war is also not how we achieve equality. This is what the film is saying, by the way, not my personal opinion. Okay, my personal opinion. What do I feel about using violence in revolution? You gotta do what you gotta do, you know? Wakandans were never superior to anyone else, and this belief that they were is what created Killmonger. I also really like the allusions to abolitionist theory of how communities must address mutual and shared harm and the mechanisms through which they grow in order to prevent harm from proliferating. We cannot simply punish the results, we must address the causes. In a way, though, I do think T'Challa can be seen as the model minority myth. There's a clear preference for his way of ruling and his beliefs over the violent and hateful Killmonger, who's literally called Killmonger. But what I also believe the movie wants to suggest is that all of these perspectives are valid. Killmonger was valid to an extent. T'Challa was valid to an extent. They are not distinct. Killmonger was not an outsider. They are not of a different cloth. Simply being raised in diaspora does not make you less than or worthy of abandonment. They are of the same family, and we are all of the same people. This internal and fabricated conflict is completely irrational. Moreover, it is unethical. Protecting tradition and history should never come at the expense of allowing the future to progress unaided. And all because you view some people as not being one of you? And so while the emotions that found these philosophies, both that of the Wakandans and Killmonger, are valid, the way in which it's being expressed is not. Not only leads to more fear and more anger. And ultimately, that is my point of view on the Diaspora Wars. I said ultimately a lot, haven't I? And thus, that is my point of view on the Diaspora Wars. We cannot allow ourselves to be any more further divided. We cannot allow the rage and fear to multiply. It doesn't do us any good. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, I really hope you learned something new. I feel that a lot of what the internet is struggling with recently is lack of curiosity, but I am always open to discussion, so leave any thoughts and ideas down in the comments. Go subscribe, go watch the video on my channel if you feel so inclined. Like, give me a hype, and I will see you so soon. Bye 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 bye.